our last message from Isaiah, and we're going to look at three passages from Isaiah 55, then 61, then 66. The background of all of this is the word salvation, although it's not actually mentioned in these passages. It's mentioned in chapters before and after and all the way through Isaiah, but, I haven't put it up. The overhead's right here. But if you can have it up there, that'll be good.
Which one?
Right, I've got three words: come, benefit, or you could say be blessed, and go out. Okay, well, can we have the next slide, which is a picture?
Yep.
I want to take you to Ethiopia.
Oh,
You have to use your imagination. Stuart doesn't have to use his imagination a lot, he can remember. But here are a couple of girls, and they've got a couple of wares to sell. The one on the left, as we look at it, is selling kai shin kurt, which means red onion, which means I stay away because I don't do onion, or onions don't do me. And so I think the first Amharic word I learnt was shinkurt, meaning so I could say, no, I know shinkurt, I am shinkurt. And anyway, kai shinkurt is, they told us that the colour of our skin was kai, red, we're red. A few people said netch, meaning white, but, we're red-skinned as opposed to brown or black-skinned. But anyway, and the one on the right looks like she's got tomatoes here. But if you can just imagine just walking, like to our college, I'm just going to use that as an example from our mission compound, and we caught a few kind of taxi things in inverted commas. Won't bother describing them. But, you walk along the one of the main roads, and there's people calling out from every direction. It doesn't have to be a marketplace, but there are people calling out, basically saying, come and buy my kai shin kurt, or come and buy the sandals that I've got on my bit of plastic on the ground, or come and buy toilet paper. I did sometimes buy that on the way home. Come and buy umbrellas, and I did buy an umbrella when it was suddenly we had a downpour of rain. So it's quite handy having some of these people on the streets. But you see, your day begins with people calling out, because at 5 a.m. the Muslims are putting that across there, come to Allah to pray. Then you've got the Ethiopian Orthodox Church competing, sometimes at the same time, come and pray in the Ethiopian Orthodox way, which is not quite the same as the evangelical way. But, they're still wanting to worship God. But as you walk along the street, there's these kind of bits of newspaper and bits of plastic that are basically houses on the footpath. Mm. And people are coming out in the morning because you leave early, cooler part of the day and all of that. You leave early and you have these people cooking their breakfast on the frying pan. And then next to them you've got the beggars. And so the beggars are sitting there calling out, money, we want money. And, of course, if you're white, you're kind of like a walking bank. So, you get all these voices calling out, wanting money. And so it's just a barrage of sound of people calling out. And then, of course, you've got the sounds. Because on the road, that can be used for cars, people, donkeys, sheep, chickens, or any other animals that you happen to be wanting to move, usually with a little boy aged about 7 with a stick about this long, and he's there controlling the animals. And he can control quite a large group of animals, or goats. So I missed out goats. And so you've got all this happening, but this calm, all of them are trying to grab your attention. And so you're trying to think, I've got to walk here, And that is a background for this passage. This kind of calling out where there are all these voices calling you to come and buy their wares. And so some of you, if you haven't been to Asia and Africa and been in those sort of places, you've seen pictures of them. It's been on the TV or it's been somewhere. So I think you can imagine what I'm talking about. We don't have it here in most places. There are a few places in Australia, but not very many. So in Isaiah 55, there is another call. There is another voice. In the middle of all of the other loud marketplace voices that are going on, here's another voice. But this one's different. Come, all you who are thirsty. That sounds like one of those street peddlers, with their bottles of, they may not be clean bottles, but then bottles of soft drink and whatever. Come to the waters, and you who have no money, now that's a new thing. What seller is going to say, come, all you who have no money? That's weird, isn't it? Come, buy and eat, okay? You can get your kebabs, you can get your, all of the rest of the food that's there, street food, without money and without cost. A different voice. And you have to listen carefully to hear this voice. Because this voice is insistent, but is not aggressive. There is a difference. It goes on. He or she, why spend money on what is not bread, and your labour on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare. Give ear and come to me, hear me, that your soul may live. I will make an everlasting covenant with you, my faithful love promised to David. Wow. Can we have the next one, please? Now, in these 3 verses, there's packed into them some pretty amazing promises. Promises that go with the word that's not used in the passage but is used just about everywhere else around it, that is salvation. So what's he actually promising? First of all, you don't have to pay. Now that's good news. Because where would you get enough money to actually get all of these things, including this kind of satisfaction that's here? So what he's offering is something that's free of charge, and there's rich food involved, so your thirst is going to be quenched, and there's some kind of food that's going to satisfy, it specifically says, your soul. So it's not talking about the normal wares that street people are offering. And satisfaction, I didn't put that there, but satisfaction for your labour. We often get that, but do we always get that? Sometimes we get frustration for our labour. And sometimes you think, well, I shouldn't have bothered. Because nobody seems to be grateful, it doesn't seem to be helping anyone, and so you end up being tired. Well, it's not just physical tiredness, but emotional tiredness, because you're not satisfied. And then you've got an everlasting covenant. Now, this is going to be a covenant of love, because it says so, my faithful love that was promised to David. Covenant means a very, very, very strong and close agreement and walking together. It means companionship. It means you are not alone. It means you have a friend. And that friend is God himself. When I was at university and I was going through a downtime, I wrote a little poem called My Friend God. I showed it to someone who couldn't quite understand it. How can your God be a friend? Now, it was all in imagery that I could understand, but I had come to that realisation of what a strong blessing it is to have God as a friend. Amazing blessing when you're going through a hard time. And somebody else that I showed it to couldn't quite, could believe in God and all of that, but couldn't quite get this concept of God as friend. That's what covenant means, friend. It means we can speak to God as friend. It means that he is with us as friend. Mm-hmm. And the bond between him and me is a love bond. Mm-hmm. That, I don't know what that would be worth in money. But even if we had all the money in the world, it wouldn't be enough. If we go down a little bit to verse 7. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the evil man his thoughts, or her thoughts, her way. Let them turn to the Lord, and he will have mercy on them. And let him turn to our God, for he will freely pardon. Forgiveness for sin is in this covenant, is in this relationship. We call that salvation, don't we? Mm. But actually, all of this is salvation. It's all in it. It's all part of the same bundle. I want to turn to Isaiah 61. We've got that. And this is, I'm just going to read the first 3 verses again. And these are verses that Jesus read out in a synagogue in Nazareth when he was given a scroll to stand up and read it there. And this is what he selected. He selected Isaiah 61 verses 1 to 3. And this all makes sense because it's written in advance by Isaiah, but actually it is about the ministry of Jesus. And Jesus was making it absolutely crystal clear that he is the one that Isaiah prophesied about. And this is what Jesus read. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord, for the display of his splendour. In here is a list of some of the benefits that are listed here, which are all part of this salvation package. Binding up brokenhearted. And anyone who's been through an experience of being brokenhearted, for whatever reason. That's pretty good news. To proclaim freedom for the captives, release of darkness for the prisoners. Like, these are all big, huge things. That's interesting about the year of the Lord's favour, which I didn't put there, but I did put down the day of vengeance of our God. Well, how can that be good news? Don't you ever feel like you want the unjust and wicked and evil enemy, whoever that is, to get justice? Don't you ever feel like that? Now, we're told that it's not ours to pay them back. It's not ours to, give vengeance. We can't do it. But guess what? God can and will. And that's why we don't have to. So, we can confidently know that God is the one who is going to deal with those obstructionist people or those wicked people or those unjust people or those whatever it is, arrogant people or whatever, who are mistreating us. It doesn't give us liberty because that would actually damage us too much. We sometimes need to walk away and let God do what only He can and will do. This is not an if, this is a will. And for those who are grieving, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. We grieve about a lot of different things. We know about grieving because of death. But we grieve when we are betrayed. We grieve when we lose someone or something, not through death, but through broken relationships or even because of moving away. We grieve when we're disappointed, where we had high hopes of something being really good or a relationship being really good. It goes sour and it even becomes worse than that. That's grief. It's huge grief. And that is included here. To provide for these people. To give them a crown of beauty instead of ashes. Ashes is a sign of being in mourning, being in lament, being, it can be a sign of saying, I'm sorry, I've done something wrong. But it's very often a sign of, like, I'm in grief because, my town is under attack or is threatened. There's a whole lot of reasons. But God gives to these very people a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. And that's not what our enemies think can possibly come out of this. But when we are with God in this covenant relationship, which is when we become Christians, we are in that relationship. This is what is promised. To give us a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Now, that's not to say that we don't need to go through some process and some time and maybe some praying with somebody. But that's what He wants to give. When I was reading this, I was thinking about a day in Ethiopia, just again walking along that path, that main road. And there was this guy standing there with a stick, leaning on the stick, because his foot was deformed. And he was begging. That's all he could do. If you're in Ethiopia, and your foot is deformed like that, you have no opportunity to go to school, no opportunity to get a job. You are marked for the rest of your life as a beggar. You can't do anything else. You are, in a sense, captive to being a beggar. Now, when I looked at this guy, what occurred to me was, if I had been born in Ethiopia at the same time, that would have been my lot. He had exactly the same foot deformity, same foot as I had at birth. Now, what would Jesus have done? I think it's pretty clear, isn't it? Jesus could have come along and just, with a word, healed him. He could have fixed that foot, made it turn round. And I can remember talking to my minister back in Sydney where I grew up, he was a significant man, minister, and very godly man. And I asked him whether this kind of healing could happen today. He said, well, I can't really talk about it publicly because there are some leaders in this church that don't really go along with this. But he visited a lot of people in hospital and he prayed with them. And then he described one particular example of a foot being deformed, and he prayed, and as he prayed, he saw with his own eyes this foot come into the right position. I've never seen that, but he saw it. And he said, I can tell them, but they won't let me tell the congregation. So I'm so grateful that he told me. And how do I think of my own situation? Because I obviously don't have a deformed foot in that way. I've got a few funny issues with feet, but not that. Well, there was this new method in Australia where my mother had to do a lot of stretching every single feed, and it was pretty awful for me, but pulled down my foot every feed. I can't really remember. I can remember being told about it. And I remember my father saying he screamed and ran out of the house. He couldn't stand my screaming, etc., etc. But did it every single feed, and in between put my foot in plaster, and then, let it settle for a little while, then took the plaster off, more of the same. And for all of my school years, I had to go to the hospital to do foot and leg exercises. Was that not healing? I'm grateful for that. Because God gives every kind of healing. And I think if he was in Ethiopia, that guy just would have been healed in one go. Exactly. There was no alternative. The methods that my mother used, I remember talking to someone who deals with babies, medically. And I told her about that, and she said they'd heard of that method. And so they were just looking at beginning to implement it. So they were getting training about it, and which I was pleased to hear. It doesn't work for every child, but it does work for a lot. All of these methods are part of healing, and that set me free to go to school, not in a wheelchair, but to walk. And I walked and walked and walked and walked the streets. Still love walking. Walking is a gift. Walking gives a sense of liberty. And even if I have to use a walker, I can walk on my 2 feet, and I'm getting better at it. When Jesus healed one man by the pool, he said, do you want to be healed? And I used to think that was a very strange question. Of course he's going to want to be healed. Well, what would it mean?
No more begging.
What's it?
No more begging.
Eh?
No more begging.
No more begging. That's number one. It would mean you can't beg if you look perfectly normal. You really need to have an obvious deformity to beg or something. That means he would have to learn a trade. And here he is, a mature man, having to start from the beginning that other people would have started to do when they were 12. He would have to take responsibility in society. But he wanted to go through all of that. And so he said, yes, Lord. And on that basis, Jesus healed him. And I'm sure the end result was much better, even if there was that challenge there. The next one. The third passage is right near the very end of Isaiah. It's a passage that's not read very often. And we're going to start at verse 18 down to 21. And this is God speaking. And I, because of their actions and their imaginations, I'm about to come and gather all nations and tongues, and they will come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and I will send some of those who survive to the nations, to Tarshish, to Libya, to Lydians, famous as archers, to Tubal, to Greece, and the distant islands, that they have not the ones that have not heard of my fame will see my glory. They will proclaim my glory among the nations, and they will bring all your brothers from all the nations to my holy mountain in Jerusalem as an offering to the Lord. On horses and chariots and wagons and mules and camels, says the Lord. They will bring them as the Israelites bring their grain offerings to the temple of the Lord in ceremonially clean vessels, and I will select some of them, that's some of these non-Jews, to be priests and Levites, says the Lord. This is a vision of an international mission. And that some people have told me, but in the Old Testament it's only the Jews who were chosen. Well, my Jewish friend says, I don't want to be chosen because it seems to mean chosen to be for persecution for Jews. She doesn't like the idea of being special because that sounds like you're above other people. She says, that's not it. That's the wrong reading, what's the wrong understanding of it. Chosen means chosen to do something. Chosen to be a light to the Gentiles, which Isaiah has written about, and of course Jesus would fulfill more than anyone. But actually, what do? We choose people for a task, don't we? We choose them to do something, to go out, or to do something I can't do. We choose for a purpose, not just to say you are superior. And I think she's right that the Jews were chosen to be, the ones who got all these words from God and wrote them down, etc., etc. But they were the ones chosen to pass them on. And we find even in the Old Testament that there are stories all over the place. They're in little corners here and there. They're not the main line of people who were non-Jews coming to join them. And Rahab, for example, she'd been a prostitute in Canaan. But she opened her house to protect these Israelite men, and she joined the Jewish people. Why? Because she saw what their God was doing and she said, I want that one. And she got the message through the Israelites. And so she said, I want that. And so she left and she went with them. And we've got Naaman the leper. He was a Syrian. He got healed. He took his faith back to where he came from. And we've got, when they left Egypt even, there were Egyptians who must have put the blood on the doorpost. You know, anybody could do that if they wanted to. And they went with them into the desert and they joined the Israelites. They became one with them. And all along the way, there are these little stories popping up. Jonah went to preach to Nineveh. We've got people there who responded. Even along the way, the sailors responded and worshipped God. You know, these sorts of things were happening all over the place. I said it's not the main storyline that we get, but there's enough evidence if you really look for it, because I've had students write papers on this. There's lots there. And Isaiah says it here very clearly. You go out to all of these other nations, but also bring them in, and also give them the authority to be priests and Levites. Now that's not the normal pattern, because if they're Israelites, they have to be from certain families, da-da-da-da. But Isaiah could see that if this salvation is going to go out to all the world, you're going to have some people appointed as leaders among them. This week I have been, for some reason, thinking about a man called Moshe, a student that I taught 25 years ago in England, Ethiopian, the first Ethiopian that we've met. And I should have actually put his photo up there. And so he was actually a kind of bishop in his church in Ethiopia, in Western Ethiopia. And he came to England to do 3 years of study, which is a big deal because your wife can't come and all that, not enough money for all of that. And so he had to live with the other students who were younger. And, so we got to know Moshe. I got to know Moshe quite well. For various reasons, I had to take care of his courses and teach him one-on-one some subjects that, nobody else was around to teach. And, but, this man who had been up there in Ethiopia came to England, and he was treated as right down there. But this man humbled himself, and he showed so much grace and kindness and servant heart to everyone. And yet when there was a significant injustice done, when the whole college was aware of, somebody at the top did something they shouldn't have done, Moshe did his own protest. Moshe was very sharp on what was right and wrong, and he wasn't going to go along with what was wrong, which was blatantly wrong. He wasn't going to just say, that's okay, No. But he wasn't nasty about it. And this week, I just wondered, there's another man from Ethiopia that we're still in touch with, one of the many, but Garom. And Garom is, he'd be now in his early 40s, and he's now, he's trained as a minister, and he's kind of semi-involved with leadership questions. And something is happening in his church that should not be happening. So he's been emailing me saying, what do you think about this, and da-da-da-da, because I know something about his denomination. And so in the middle of that, I suddenly thought, would you by any chance know Mersha? Mersha was Western Ethiopia. Gurun was in the capital, Addis. So I emailed him because I tried to contact Gurun and couldn't. And he said, oh, Mersha, yes. I knew him since I was a teenager. And then he said he was the forerunner of this present bad guy who's doing this stuff that he shouldn't be doing. And anyway, so then we've started emailing back and forth, and he sent me some photos, and he said, unfortunately, Mersha died a couple of years ago. But it was really good to hear how much Mersha was a servant leader consistently in his own country. But he told us that, and of course other people knew, and I saw it written about on the internet too, after Gurun had shown it to me. When Swedish missionaries came to Ethiopia years ago, they had a very hard time getting their message across to the Ethiopian people, who were mostly Ethiopian Orthodox. And so they had, this particular couple had been in Ethiopia for something like 20 years. And not a single person had responded positively to their message, which was an evangelical one, and come back to the Bible. The Orthodox Church is not strong on the Bible at all. And some of the things they require of people is, I suppose, a bit like some other places where you've got to kiss the door and you've got to kiss all these statues and all that kind of stuff, but people don't have a clue what it's about. So these Swedish missionaries had laboured there for around 20 years. And so they decided the only thing they can do is pray, 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 pray. They did that. And then one day, and Mersha happened to be there. He was a student at this stage. One day, it was like God's Holy Spirit broke through. There was a small group of, well, I don't know why Mersha was there, but he and I think two others. And there was a revival that broke out. And that massive waves of effects of revival. And that the effects of that are still going on in Ethiopia. Now, Mersha was about our age, so he would have been a student, let me say 18, I don't really know exactly how old he was. So way back then is when that happened. And so Mersha, and there were two others who witnessed to that original revival. And Mersha then, when he came to England, when he preached, wow, he was a great preacher, he called us back. So here is an Ethiopian coming to England and calling Westerners back to, a strong faith in a strong God. They have seen miracle after miracle after miracle in Ethiopia, and we were there and heard testimonies of some. And that goes across several churches. And it's just amazing. And I just thought of this thinking, even Ethiopia, this sampling of nations really means everywhere in the world. Because God's good news is not contained to the Jews, and it's not contained to any other people group, and it's not contained to white people, which is what we've got in this room today, but it is for everyone, that the glory of God, that they might proclaim my glory among the nations. And we're part of that, proclaiming God's glory among the nations, but it also obviously means crossing boundaries between people of different nationalities, because God's work is for them as well. I think that might be no, there's one more. I think just a summary. So come without charge. Get all the benefits. Be up for that. And be ready to go out and do it. And even cross national boundaries if you need to, if that's what you're called to do. And see others from other countries proclaim, like Mersha, God's glory among the nations.